Alright, I think I'm recording. We'll see how this goes. Um, so I want to go over a few things with you quickly. Um,
Mm.
I saw a common thing for you is you're kind of drawing your figure like this,
Mm-hmm.
which is a pretty normal place to start from. Lots of people start drawing the figure like that. Um,
Okay.
and I just want to get you into the habit maybe of um drawing a bit more where you're not really just drawing what you're looking at, but you're able to interpret it a little better, and you're applying some of your own creative touch onto what's happening by interpreting it. So,
Mm.
to start, I need to go over a few things that might seem like they are unrelated to figure drawing, but they're really quite integral to it. So, to start, we have the four basic shapes, and that is the sphere, oops, the cube, um, the cone. No, that's too close. Um, the sphere, the cube, the cone. There was another one that usually gets mentioned, but I can't really remember it right. Whatever. Oh no. The three basic shapes. Okay. um. So a good place to start is just to practice drawing a sphere or a circle, because circles, if you can find a circle in anything that you're drawing, they're really great reference points because they're the same size no matter how you look at them. They're always just a circle,
Mm.
unless they're like, obscured by a cube sitting in front of them. Then then they'll look different, but they're always a sphere. And so what we do when we draw a sphere, because they're always the same size, we have to add perspective to it. And we do that by drawing the center line. So this is the center of the sphere. If we drew a line all the way around it from top to bottom, that's the center line. And then there's another one if we drew a line all the way around. So then this is the perspective of it where it's facing this way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so normally when you're drawing that, it would just be like this. Something like that. Now for cubes, they're much easier to place in perspective because they are just 4 or 6 squares on top of each other or connected. So they're all parallel lines, so they can perfectly tell you how they lie in perspective. Um, and then cones are good to place in perspective because they have a flat circular bottom, and then they have a flat circular bottom that connects, or that just comes to a point. So you can always kind of tell where the center line of a cube is going to be really easily. A cone, if you want it to be directional, you may have to just place a line so that you know which way it's pointing. And then, so you just kind of want to get used to thinking of these things where objects take up space in, like, they occupy volume in space. They don't just sit. And then, so some very quick perspective would be, hold on, would be like this, where you have this line, which is the horizon line, or the height of your eye where you're looking. If you were to look straight, then your eye would eventually meet the horizon line, and then everything that's above your line of sight, or where your eyes are, you're looking up at, and then everything below your eyes you're looking down at. So we can make these lines that connect to the vanishing points at the edge. So this would be 2 perspective. And all vertical lines are parallel. And then we can draw cubes very quickly, so we see them in perspective. It's a bit of an extreme perspective because the lines are too close together, but you get it. And then if we go above, then now we're looking up at it. So that's just quickly how you draw stuff in perspective, and I'll probably go over more perspective drawing at some point because it is very important. And then, so when we think about drawing people now, we kind of have to consider all of this and how it relates to people. So the first thing we want to do is figure out what is the motion of a pose. So if we have somebody, say, just standing still, straight on, perfectly rigid looking at you, then their shoulders will be horizontal, their pelvis will be horizontal, they will just be standing straight. So the line of action from their head to their feet will just be this straight line. And this will run through the center of the head and through the spine all the way to the to the
Okay.
base of the pelvis. And then so somebody will just be standing straight. They'll be very rigid. And this is kind of where people start, where everything's very flat, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now what we want to do is we want to add volume, and we want to make the person feel like they're in space. So what if they're still standing very still and rigid, but we're up high and we're looking down at them? Well, then the head will be sort of a rectangular prison. So think of it like a cube. And then the neck's coming out underneath that. Oh, right. I remember the other basic shape.
What is it?
It's the cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
So a cylinder, similar to cone, it has two flat sides. So you can always tell whether you're looking up or down at it. And then you just want to put a center line in to know which way it's facing. Or which way you, in your mind, it's facing. Because they're all of these are perfectly symmetrical, right? So you kind of have to decide where you want them to face. Anyway, so when you add the person in perspective, then you're kind of thinking of it like if this is a 1-point perspective, which is just a single vanishing point, and then the eye line is up here, so then they're below the eye line, so we're looking down at them, then everything will overlap a little bit and it'll all come back to the vanishing point. Right? So now, just by introducing this slight added layer, they all of a sudden start to feel like they have more depth to them. They don't feel quite so flat. Even though I'm obviously drawing like a box person, it's still very rigid and flat. One's like making a save file.
Okay.
Okay. And then the feet. So then now we're still same basic thing where it's very rigid, but it feels more solid than just this. Okay. And now I'm going to add a couple quick examples of stuff that I was drawing earlier in the year for some fundamental practice for figure drawing. And I'll explain it.
Okay.
No, not this one. Here. So what I was drawing here was just very quick poses where it's, I think most of these, well, actually, all of these are all 30-second poses.
Oh,
So what I was trying to do was just establish the line, let me do later, establish the line of action, or the line where the spine is, just on the torso, because the torso is a pretty solid mass where it's easy to see everything. And then I would place it in perspective and then separate it into the mass of the pelvis and the mass, like the space between the pelvis and the rib cage, and then the mass of the rib cage. And this concept where the torso is kind of a single shape is usually called the bean, because it kind of has a bean-like shape to it, where it turns into something like that. It looks a bit like a bean.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
So to simplify it, the rib cage can be an oval that is, if it's 2 units wide, then it's 3 units tall. So that would be, if you have a circle, cut it in half, and then make it a half a circle taller. That's more or less the oval that you get for the rib cage.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pelvis is like not quite that distance, but just a little bit below it, and is a circle. And then you have the center line and you connect them. And where the torso bends, it does some interesting things. So go back to here. Oh no, what have I done? I accidentally drew on my background layer. So when we're doing the bean, what we want to do is figure out, say this is the center line. Somebody's kind of standing upright, really tall, and they're puffing out their chest. Then this is the center line, the line of action for the upper body. And then this is kind of the perspective on it. We're looking up at the chest, like that. And then we're looking down at the pelvis, because the pelvis will be tilted down. And you have this area in here, which is the abdomen. And then the pelvis. Center lines on each of the masses if you to get them all lined up. And then here, because they're kind of standing up tall, there's a bit of a compression around, like around the backside of the torso. So you'll have a pinch, and then because this side is being stretched out, you'll get this. And then that's what gives it this bean shape. It being squished on one side and pulled open on the other. So a really good exercise for now is just to try to observe either the spine, which usually has this kind of shape, or the center line from the sternum to the abdomen, which usually is something like that. So it'll go like from the clavicle down the sternum, between the chest, then there's the rib cage, along the abdominal wall, and into the pubic area. So that's what this center line is. And the main thing you want to try to get from this is interpreting the figure into something that you can understand, because just looking at a human, I mean, obviously we can recognize humans and we know what they look like. This is one thing that, as long as you can see, it should be very simple to do. But we don't really understand what we're looking at. We can't make sense of how it makes a three-dimensional shape in a way that we can explain or make use of. We can't really interpret how light falls on the shape to give it form and structure. We don't, like, we intuit all these things, but we don't understand them without practice. So all you have to do to get a good foundation is to get the bean for now, and to start observing how things work in perspective, whether we're looking up at it, whether we're looking down at it, whether it's a shape coming towards us or going away from us, that kind of thing. And then to add limbs to the bean, you can just make a simple curve like this to add the clavicle, and then some lines for the shoulder socket, that line for the chest, and then the upper arm can just be like a tapered cylinder. The legs are similar. They kind of come off of it like this, and you can make them just cylinders. And, you know, we can get into more the shapes and the anatomy of limbs when you're ready for it. But the best thing that you can do is to just find objects that are spheres, cubes, cones, and cylinders, and just practice drawing them, and kind of getting a foundationalist understanding of how perspective works, which we can also go over another time.